Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Global Fact 8, the first and the leading conference on fact-checking organized by fact-checkers for fact-checkers. Today, we are coming to you from St. Petersburg, Florida, the headquarters of the Poynter Institute, home of the International Fact-Checking Network. The IFCN, premier alliance of fact-checking organizations, is proud to organize our 8th edition of this Global Fact Conference. Since 2014, Global Fact has been the must-attend gathering for fact-checkers of the world. Founded in late 2015, the IFCN has been advocating for higher standards among the global fact-checking community. To fulfill this purpose, a code of principles for fact-checkers was developed and introduced to the community in 2016. The code was signed by 35 organizations from 27 countries immediately following its launch. Shortly thereafter, Facebook announced that they will rely on the IFCN's code of principles as one of the requirements to participate in their third-party fact-checking program. This groundbreaking moment happened in December of 2016 after an open letter to Mark Zuckerberg was signed by the fact-checking community addressing the need to fight against misinformation on the platform. Today, the number of IFCN's verified signatories has exceeded 100 organizations from more than 50 countries. Signatures of the IFCN Code of Principles range from big beasts of traditional media, such as Le Monde Le Décodeur in France and the Washington Post in the US, to global news wires such as AFP, AP, the EPA, and Reuters, to non-profit organizations like Africa Check of South Africa, Full Fact of the UK, and Chicago of Argentina, and startups such as PolitiFact in the US and Rappler in the Philippines. As the list of signatures has grown, so has the diversity of news and political environments in which they work. In the last couple of years, not only has the global fact-checking community has grown, but the horizons of the practice of fact-checking have grown as well. Today, compared to the mid-2010s, fact-checkers specialize and provide professional services in a variety of areas to some of the largest technology platforms. Google, Facebook, Line, TikTok, WhatsApp, and YouTube are among those that feature fact-checks in their various products and services in different capacities. They range from surface and fact-checks to their users on the platform. Some work with fact-checkers in commercial capacities, adding signals to their content moderation practices. The IFCN worked diligently to bring you an in-person alternative to the Global Fact Conference this year by utilizing industry-leading technology to facilitate conversations among fact-checkers and stakeholders. The first day of Global Fact 8 will offer a number of sessions to set the tone for the remainder of the conference. First Draft's Claire Wardle will kick off the summit with a keynote address, sharing her insights on the fight against misinformation during the pandemic and what should be done to protect people from harmful misinformation. Claire will also join me for a fireside chat at the end of today. You will also hear from fact-checkers in countries around the world, including the Philippines, Brazil, South Africa, and Norway. Health officials from the World Health Organization will discuss their collaborative efforts in vaccine safety communication with the fact-checking community. Later today, I'll be in a conversation with representatives from Facebook about the third-party fact-checking program as we reflect on the 5-year mark of the initiative. Please bring your questions and I'll do my best to surface them during this important dialogue. Based on the overwhelmingly positive feedback from the community, you will hear from the investigative journalism experts Craig Silverman of ProPublica and Jane Litvinenko from the Shorenstein Center, as they will offer an extensive and relevant training session for fact-checkers. Throughout the conference, you will hear from presenters, moderators, and panelists from 40 different countries during more than 20 sessions. There's a lot to expect from this year's Global Fact. Stay logged in to participate in sessions on harassment against fact-checkers, regional collaboration among the community, regulation efforts in Europe towards big tech media, literacy in the age of COVID-19, structured fact-checking data through claim review, the importance of good national statistics for fact-checkers, commercializing fact-checking as a service, fact-checking when democracy is under threat, and a featured presentation with American journalism expert Tom Rosenstiel. The verified signatures of the International Fact-Checking Network will also be able to join regional breakout sessions to discuss their specific challenges and opportunities from their regional perspectives. Attendees will have opportunities to virtually network with other participants throughout the platform's lounge and meeting features as well. We'll look forward to catching up with you during our dedicated lounge hours between noon and 12:45 Eastern Time, GMT-4 each day. You can also browse through the attendees. With speakers and attendees, you can set one-on-one meetings with them even without leaving the conference website. Our goal with the second virtual Global Fact is to end this highly contentious year in the fight against misinformation and move forward as a community in 2022, united around our shared values and ideas on the future of the internet, how content will be moderated, and what role we, the fact-checking community, will play. Today not only marks the first day of Global Fact 8, it also marks the beginning of vital conversations on the future of fact-checking and its relationship with readers, technology companies, policymakers, and other stakeholders. We will dedicate more resources to foster dialogue and representation of the community, to scale the impact of our work, and promote our values around transparency and accountability with a stronger emphasis on our own duties and responsibilities. As fact-checking has become a household name, I hope this conference will help to set the record straight by showing who fact-checkers are, what fact-checkers do, and what they don't do, and whether professional fact-checkers are agents of censorship or promoters of factual information working under exceedingly tough circumstances. As I said similarly last year, conferences are all about their participants. What you will see over the course of this virtual Global Fact is the outcome of the work done by this community. I salute every single fact-checker who has put their souls and minds to this virtual gathering by participating in a number of rehearsals and tech checks to share their know-how with their fellow colleagues. I appreciate the time and dedication you have not spared from others. You have shown that we still can care for each other even though we had to meet virtually from different parts of the world once again. Before I cede the floor, well, not the floor, but the screen to Adair, the Director of the Reporters Lab, aka the Dean of Fact Checking, I would like to thank the IFCN team, Örsek and Elena Dorak, for all of their hard work making this week happen, and to our colleagues at the Poynter Institute, whose credibility and reach has been an essential value for the network, which we appreciate. Special thanks go to our sponsors and supporters of Global Fact 8, Google News Initiative, Facebook, Craig Newmark Philanthropies, TikTok, Luminate Group, Duke Reporters Lab, and the Nation of Democracy. We thank you. Now, if I may, I'd like to turn the program over to Bill Adair and ask him to take it from here. Bill, over to you.
Thanks, Baybars. Welcome to Norway.
Pants on fire!
It's great to be here once again among your fjords and gnomes and your great Norwegian meatballs.
Pants on fire!
You mean, it turns out I'm not in Norway. Turns out I'm still in Durham. And once again, we are joined together through the magic of video and, more importantly, by our strong sense of community. And that's the theme of my remarks today. 7 years ago, a bunch of us crammed into a classroom in London. I had organized the conference with Poynter because I had heard from several of you that there was a desire for us to come together. It was a magical experience that we all had in the London School of Economics. We were able to discuss our common experiences and challenges. As I noted in a past speech, one of our early supporters, Tom Glazier of the Democracy Fund, gave us some critical advice when I was planning the meeting with the folks at Poynter. Tom said, "Build a community, not an association." His point was that we should be open and welcoming and that we shouldn't erect barriers about who could take part in our group. That's been an important principle of the IFCN and one that's been possible with Poynter as our home. You can see the community every week in our email listserv. Have you looked at some of those threads? Lately, they've helped fact-checkers find the status of COVID passports in countries around the world, learn which countries are still in lockdown, and which countries still allow indoor dining. All of that is possible because of the wonderful way that we help each other. Global Fact keeps getting bigger and bigger. It was so big in Cape Town that we needed a drone to take our group photo. At this rate, for our next get-together, we'll need to take the group photo from a satellite. Tom's advice has served us really well. By establishing the IFCN as a program within the Poynter Institute, a globally renowned journalism organization, we have not only built a community, we avoided the bureaucracy and frustration of creating a whole new organization. We stood up the IFCN quickly, and it became a wonderfully global organization with a staff and advisory board that represents a mix of fact checkers from every continent except Antarctica, at least not yet. Our community succeeded in creating a common code of principles that may well be the only ethical framework in journalism that includes a real verification and enforcement mechanism. The Poynter-based IFCN, with its many connections in journalism and tech, has raised millions of dollars for fact-checkers all over the world. And we have done all of this without bloated overhead, new legal entities, and insular meetings that would distract us from our real work, finding facts and dispelling bullshit. For most fact checkers, running our own organizations or struggling for resources within our newsrooms is already time-consuming enough. As we look to the future, some fact checkers from around the world have offered ideas at how the IFCN can improve. I like many of their suggestions. Let's start with the money the IFCN distributes. The fundraising I mentioned is amazing. More than $3 million since March 2020. It's pretty cool how that gets distributed. All of that money came from major tech companies in the United States, and 84% of the money goes to fact checkers outside the US. But we can be even more transparent about all of that, just as IFCN's principles demand transparency of its signatories. We can also continue to expand the advisory board to be even more representative of our growing community. Some other improvements. We should demand more data and transparency from our funders in the tech community. Fact checkers also can advocate to make sure that our large tech partners treat members of our community fairly, and we can work together more closely to find new sources of revenue to pay for our work, whether that's through IFCN or other collaborations. One possible way is to arrange a system so fact checkers can get paid for publishing fact checks with claim review, the tagging system that our Duke Reporters Lab developed with Google and Jigsaw. A bit of our own transparency, they supported our work on that and a similar product for images and video called Media Review. Our goal at Duke is to help fact checkers expand their audiences and create new ways for you to get paid for your important work. Our community also needs more diverse funding sources to avoid relying too heavily on any one company or sector. But we also need to be realistic and recognize the financial and legal limitations of the funders and of our fact checkers, which represent an incredibly wide range of business models. Some of you have good ideas about that, and we should be talking more about all of it. The IFCN and Global Fact provide essential venues for us to discuss these issues and make progress together, as do the regional fact-checking collaboratives and networks from Latin America to Central Europe to Africa, and the numerous country-specific collaborations in Japan, Indonesia, and elsewhere. What a dazzling movement we have built together. If there's a message in all of this, it's that we need to convene and talk more often. The pandemic has made that difficult. This is the second year we've had to meet virtually, and like most of you, I too am sick of talking to my laptop, as I am now. For now though, let's be grateful for the community we have and this wonderful weather. It's sunny here in Norway today.
Pants on fire!
I'm looking forward to seeing you in person next year. And now, across the Atlantic, to my good friend, Neil Brown.
Thanks, Bill. And as usual, you have shown a keen sense of fashion. And thanks to Baybars and the entire IFCN and Poynter teams for working so hard to bring you a great Global Fact 8 experience. Hello to all of you. Allow me to offer a warm welcome from Florida and from the Poynter Institute. I too had hoped to see you in Oslo this time around, but alas, we were faced with a global fact variant, and so here we are. Nonetheless, we have more than 1,000 people registered to participate this week. You are signing on from 40 countries and across more than a dozen time zones. It is testimony to our collective will to connect in support of fact-checking and truth. Our Global Fact Summits are always inspiring, I would even say magical, a gathering of true believers who do important and courageous work to help citizens have access to quality, accurate information that helps guide them in their daily lives and provides them voice and power in their civic lives. As you have heard from Baybars, Global Fact 8 will present several days of really relevant programming aimed at supporting fact-checking and independent journalism. Your participation with comments in the chats, questions, attending the networking sessions, it will all contribute to the magic. In welcoming you, I want to stress the essential work of Poynter and the IFCN. Our aim every day, and this week during Global Fact 8, is to help build the long-term future and sustainability of fact-checking programs and journalism organizations. As Bill Adair eloquently said, we come together as a community. So how does this happen each day? It happens through information sharing. It happens through fundraising and grant making. It happens through publishing stories about repression and manipulation. It happens through training programs. It happens by speaking out about our common goals and speaking up when we are thwarted in gaining access to records and information that reflect reality and facts. It happens by collectively demanding that big tech companies be transparent in their practices and accountable for their role in perpetuating misinformation. It happens in sharing our experiences of the online harassment we face every day and standing together to confront the harassers. And it happens in fighting the frivolous lawsuits and other legal shenanigans by extremists and bullies trying to cost us money in order to silence our work. Our efforts on these fronts are wide-ranging, and we always seek an inclusive approach. Many days, it can be as simple as taking advantage of the IFCN's communication channels. Consider a few examples in just the past few weeks. A few weeks ago, a leader from EFE Verifica reached out to the IFCN community to inquire about how other fact-checkers around the world were addressing the media literacy issues in their countries. In a matter of hours, more than 20 organizations shared their resources and experiences regarding their successes in improving media literacy. Or when Le Monde reached out to the community regarding COVID green passes to learn how these practices were being implemented around the world. Again, within hours, the community members responded with really interesting examples from where they lived and their regions. Recently, Rumor Scanner, a fact-checking initiative in Bangladesh, and one of our new signatories to the Code of Principles, found that Facebook had blocked their Facebook page. So they asked the IFCN for help. The IFCN team contacted Facebook to sort through the issues and was able to unblock the page so that Rumor Scanner could again publish on the platform. Of course, there may be no better example of coming together in common cause than the IFCN's worldwide Coronavirus Facts Alliance, a database where so many of our organizations contributed stories and fact checks that debunked horrible misinformation about the pandemic. That kind of accountability journalism continues among our members today. Another great example, Cecchiato's investigation called The Misinformers, which exposed pseudoscientists who were promoting and selling the use of chlorine dioxide as a miracle drug to treat various diseases. It's an amazing piece of journalism, and it got concrete results. The IFCN has also helped identify and distribute real dollars for fact-checking initiatives. We recently announced a climate misinformation grant program to support collaboration between fact-checkers and credible research organizations to combat false and misleading information about climate change. We've also announced financial opportunities to help organizations deal with harassment, cybersecurity matters, and to help mentor newcomers to this work. At Poynter, we are not only proud to be home to the IFCN, but also to PolitiFact and MediaWise, two verified signatories to the Code of Principles. Together and individually, we are working to assess the impact of fact-checking and media literacy. Impact is a hard thing to measure, but there are signs that we can begin to quantify real results. For instance, last year, our MediaWise team conducted a survey on Instagram that found that 80% of respondents said that after watching our Teen Fact-Checking Network videos, they were now likely to check out the source of information before sharing it. And Stanford University, which has developed a curriculum in the United States derived from the skills of fact-checkers, found that senior citizens who took our digital media literacy course were able to spot misinformation 85% of the time versus 64% of the time for those who did not take the training. Assessing impact will continue to be an important component of our efforts at Poynter and the IFCN. At this Global Facts Summit, we welcome your ideas and input in trying to strengthen such evaluations of our work. We know the appetite for fact-checking and for learning how to improve our work is strong. This past year, some 100,000 people registered for Poynter training, up 33% from the year before. And the IFCN conducted or coordinated programs in 22 countries and in 15 languages. So it is with great pride that we produce Global Fact 8. As always, it will be a signature chance to build on our success and chart our future together. I wish you a great Global Fact 8 conference and look forward to seeing you throughout the week.
During the pandemic, journalists and fact-checkers have endured really difficult working conditions that have taken a very serious toll on many of us. If this resonates, watch my presentation. I have some concrete suggestions for supporting one another and taking back control. My name is Claire Wardle, and I know many of you, and I can't quite believe it's Global Fact 8, but I'm going to talk to you today for about 15 minutes about something that's really close to my heart, which is the fact that the work that all of us do is becoming increasingly difficult and it's taking a huge toll on our mental health. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I don't know how many of you have done this. I think many of us feel like we're now chained to our desks. We don't travel. We don't have any reason to be away doing work. We just sit here all day, many more hours than we're meant to do or that we're paid to do. So what that means is that not only are we working harder, not only is there a backdrop of a global pandemic, continuing reckoning with racial justice, climate change fears, things aren't great. So we're all trying to deal with this in our own way. And then add to that many of you spend all of your days looking at the worst parts of the internet. You spend time with people who are trying themselves to understand the world, but doing it in a way that is increasingly difficult to manage when you're trying to live your life and cope with your issues, and yet you're spending time with these people who are finding increasingly strange and bizarre and harmful ways to explain the world. So what I want to talk today about is how can we as a community work together to prevent this? Because we've all heard talks about mental health. I'm going to be really honest and say we've had a dreadful couple of years at First Draft. It's impacted all of my staff, it's impacted me. It's been awful. I'm just going to say it. And so not only is it about talking about it, it's saying, well, what are we actively going to do beyond, we should talk more about mental health. I'm done with that. I'm all about what can we do collectively to take back control, to recognize the work that all of you are doing. When I talk about information first responders, we need to think about that. You're the people who are the canaries in the coal mine. You're the first people to see this stuff. People are relying on you to deal with this stuff. And they are not necessarily giving you the support or the resources to do this in a safe way. So that's what I'm pretty frustrated about and what I want to talk to you about today. So my face is in the way of this, but The first one is that we have to agree on best practices as a sector. I'm going to talk a little bit about some research that we've done, but the big lessons I've learned over the last particularly year is you can't just say to staff, you need to take more breaks. Hey, when was the last time you took vacation? Hey, when was the last time you looked at some fun pictures of Labrador retrievers on your Instagram feed? That is not enough now. We need double the resources so that nobody is doing more monitoring than, I would say, 2 shifts a week. This whole, you can sit in front of a computer and do this 9 to 5, or let's be honest, 8 to 7, is no longer tenable. And small nonprofits who are not paid enough to do this mean that none of us have got the resources to allow staff to limit the amount of time they do this work. So we need to come up with best practices, and we need to stand by them, and we need to go to our funders and say, this is the bottom line in terms of what we can do. Secondly, we need to recognise the disproportionate impact of those monitoring disinformation aimed at their communities. It might be racial communities, it might be around their sexuality, it might be religion. There is a disproportionate toll. And as more funders talk about wanting to support organisations monitoring disinformation aimed at communities of colour, for example, they are not giving us enough money to ensure that the staff doing that are being protected, because it does have a disproportionate harm. We've talked about collaboration in this space, and I would argue that fact checkers are some of the best collaborators in the world, but we need to keep taking this seriously to avoid multiple people looking at the same awful content. Again, non-negotiable. We cannot have multiple fact checkers working on the same content when we don't need to. Fourth, we need to take back control. As you know, many of us are funded by some of the biggest companies in the world. They own the data, they're building the big databases. We're helping with that, but that doesn't mean that we necessarily have access to that data to do our own research. And finally, we need to prioritize evaluating what's working and what's not. So we're all doing this, we're all trying to help, but unless we have real answers about what works and what doesn't, then I don't want people being information first responders if we don't necessarily know how that work is going to make society better. So it's 2021, everybody. I know we talk about this at every conference, but it has to be a priority, and there's still so much we don't know. So firstly, agreeing on best practices for our sector. Sam Dudley and colleagues wrote this back in 2015 about journalists looking at really graphic content and the toll that took on people's mental health. At First Draft, we wanted to see if that was the same for people monitoring misinformation and conspiracies. It will not surprise you that 100% yes, in really serious ways. And that's why I'm even more passionate about us doing something about it. So some of our findings are, it's not just what people monitor, but it's how they work. If you have a boss that takes this seriously, if you have a manager that embeds these practices, then that's different to somebody being like, oh yeah, there's a Slack channel that you can talk about you feeling sad. There's really big differences in terms of how you can manage a team. Secondly, the emotional toll is significant. It's not just about graphic imagery. If you spend all day in groups where there are anti-vaxxers talking about the vaccine and infertility, or if you're in groups looking at Stop the Steal and the way that democracy can't be trusted, that is having significant mental impacts on staff that are doing that work. Thirdly, things like online harassment. Many fact checkers now are being targeted. It's getting increasingly serious. It's moving offline. People do not feel safe. This is no longer, oh, it's just on the internet. Safety matters. For not all content is created equal. Many people are doing this kind of monitoring and seeing their family members in these groups. It's very close to home. We have to be aware of all of the different types of content that you look at. Sometimes it's graphic content around a breaking news event. Sometimes it's conspiracy content. Sometimes it might just look like harmless memes. But all of that is really, really having a different toll on different people. And that particularly the case in terms of monitoring disinformation, targeting your own communities. I cannot stress that enough. And what that means is that many fact checkers, journalists and researchers that we spoke to admitted, I increasingly don't know what's true or not. I see these tactics being used online and then I'm offline and I don't know who to believe anymore. I don't know what's true or false. It really worrying talking to people who just kept saying, I've lost the ability to figure out what's true, and being really cynical about whether anything is true, thus proving if you spend all of your time in these spaces, and some people do, as we know, this is what happens. Even if you're a fact checker, even if you're a journalist, even if you're a researcher, it starts to mess with your ability to evaluate truth. So we are hopefully going to publish this soon, but there's a series of recommendations for managers, tech companies, funders, and I'm hoping that all of us can get behind these. Secondly, we need to recognize the disproportionate impact on those monitoring disinformation aimed at their own communities. I don't need to go after this again. I just want to say for the record, this is critical, particularly to funders and tech platforms. You cannot understand these spaces without having people from these communities doing this work, and they are being harmed when they do it. We need to collaborate to avoid duplication. I love the fact check email threads where people help each other, but how can we make this quicker? How can we make this more supportive? How can we ensure that people aren't looking at the same nonsense all day long? It's just a waste of resources and it's harmful. Like, it's actually harming us when we do this work. We need to take back control. I know this is a theme at every conference. I know we are very grateful to our funders that allow us to do this work, but I am done with the fact that we do not own this data. I am done with the fact that all of this is being built on, particularly the work of IFCN and all of you that are working for Facebook and TikTok and others. There isn't an open source database of the content that you're doing all the time. That is a problem. If we're doing this work, yes, great that we're being paid for it, but the fact that we don't have control of that work, the fact that AI systems are being built on your labor and we don't have any insights into those AI systems is a real problem. And so we have to find parallel ways that we as a community can have parallel databases that we also own and we can do research on. We can't keep saying, oh, we want more data from the platforms. We have to build those systems. We have to do more citizen science. We have to be sharing our data sets so that we can have something that we own. And finally, we need to prioritize evaluating what is working and what isn't. Last week, I was writing up something and I was trying to find something about pre-bunking versus debunking. And these were juxtaposed on Google and it just sort of summed up the whole field, which is we still know so little. We know much more than we did, but there's still a lot of confusion. Every time there's a new study, it's like that's the definitive study as opposed to, you know, knowledge is developed slowly through duplication, replication. So I would just say this, you know, we still have these big questions. When should we intervene and when should we ignore rumors and falsehoods? What are the best practices for intervening? How do we really listen to offline rumors? We're still disproportionately looking at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram and even Instagram is, it's hard. It's hard to do this work. But what does it mean when these rumors are circulating in communities? How do we empower non-traditional gatekeepers? You know, increasingly we know people who, you know, own salons or coffee shops, people who are, you know, they have a mum's Facebook group for dropping off kids at school. You know, there are people who are gatekeepers now. How do we reach them? How do we train them? How do we work with them? And finally, how do we set up research processes as part of our work? So not when somebody gets some funding, they swoop in and ask fact checkers for some, you know, can we do a research project with you? How can we embed as our daily work ways of collecting data, monitoring impact, you know, and the fact checking community is doing amazing work. And there are great examples of this, but we need to embed these processes on a daily basis. So that we ourselves can help answer these questions, partner with academics, just build out what we know and what we don't know. So I'm sorry if this has felt a little bit ranty, but I just want to say this stuff is tough. This is really tough. And I think all of us have had a moment of just wanting to give up recently. And I just want to say thank you for doing the work that you do. It means more than ever before, but it does have harms. It has consequences on all of us and our community. So give each other a virtual cuddle, send more emojis, say thank you, be empathetic. And I wish we were doing this in person so I could hug more of you. But again, thank you for the work that you do. Look after yourselves.